Right, this is David Spinks here. Well, not totally here, but trying to be here. I'm the community manager at LaWeb, and we're doing some amazing interviews with some of our top speakers. We're here with Josh Elman today, who is currently at Greylocks, but has worked at Facebook and Twitter. He's invested in Treehouse, BranchOut, TrackSpy, and Greylocks has like a whole suite of amazing companies that they've invested in. It's kind of the who's who of a lot of the tech startups today. Josh, do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure. I've been working in the Valley and Internet industry for 15 years and gotten to work on fun products like Real Player, which was doing audio and video way before stuff like Google Hangouts makes it so seamless now. And then I was part of the really early team at LinkedIn, and I've worked at a company called Zazzle, and then at Facebook and Twitter, like David mentioned. And one of the things I've always tried to think about is like how we connect people through software, and kind of all the companies I've worked at, whether it was LinkedIn, where we're trying to connect people around jobs and being able to just help each other professionally, or Twitter, where we're trying to connect people to consume and share what's going on in the world, or at Facebook, where I worked really closely on Facebook Connect, and we were trying to help every website bring people together a little bit more closely, just thinking about how the technology really changes the way we work and interact. And that's what's just super exciting to think about now with all the computers in our pockets and everything else. The ways we can connect and interact in the next 10 years is going to be even so radically different than the past 10.
That's awesome. So, I mean, you have a pretty impressive resume there. You pretty much have like the companies that everyone wants to work for. Is that something you like specifically sought out, or did it just kind of all happen serendipitously?
It's a great question. I sometimes joke that I've had trouble keeping a job because I keep on changing so often. But I think when I was first 8 years ago or 9 years ago when I first met the folks at LinkedIn, I really had this idea that the way that people were connecting was going to kind of change the way that we all work and interact and give all these services on top of. And I was lucky enough to have gone to the same program at Stanford that LinkedIn's founder Reid Hoffman did, and used that as a way to kind of get connected into LinkedIn. And since then, as LinkedIn shows you, as you start to build your professional network and meet the people that that you work with and the people who are doing similar things to you in the industry, a lot of serendipitous things can happen over time. And so I've really kind of continued to sort of help the companies I've worked at grow as fast and as hard as I could. But as new opportunities came up, I was always making sure that I was at the right place for both where I could be most helpful to the company I was at and the potential companies I could go to. And it just kind of kept spiraling in some pretty lucky ways. And I have a little bit of a ADD, and so as a company started really working and growing and being well on its way to be successful, I'd get excited about helping the next thing get there. That's partially how I kind of ended up in VC now.
Yeah. Well, so how did you end up in VC? What was that transition like, or what made you take that leap?
Yeah. So Twitter, when I was working there last summer, went through some big changes, and it was time for me to kind of look for something different. And as I really thought about my career and sort of what I've been able to be a part of so far, I thought one of the great things I've done is join companies like Twitter and LinkedIn and Zazzle and even Facebook like pretty early in their history on their way to becoming really large companies, and thought, gosh, like I could go try to find another company or another two companies and kind of do that with my career, but I wondered if there was a job that sort of was able to be helpful to more companies at one time and really be able to leverage that. And I really thought that venture capital looked like that, where part of the job is finding really interesting companies, but a big part of it is actually helping those companies grow to become really long-term sustainable things. And since there's already been around a few that had done that, I thought VC could be a great fit. And again, coming back to my connection, through LinkedIn and Facebook, I'd gotten to know Reid Hoffman and David Z at Greylocks, fairly well, and stayed in touch with them over my career. And all of a sudden, it just an opportunity opened up, and they were looking for some people to add to their team, and it just worked out amazingly, luckily for me. It's just, it's like a lot of career kind of movement is just good fortune and good timing and good luck, and then really knowing, the people who have been part of your network for your whole career.
Yep, that's definitely usually the case. You just work hard, meet a lot of good people, and serendipitous things happen, especially in Silicon Valley. But Greylocks where is it? It's in Israel. it's in India, it's in Boston and Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah, although we're primarily centered, our kind of primary focus is on Silicon Valley. We have a team in Boston, New York, looking at opportunities there. We're involved in like Tumblr in New York. And then we have a separate fund that's related to us that's in Israel and looks at some opportunities. And then we also have some people that look at opportunities in China and India. But unlike a lot of other funds, I think we're probably more focused just on the U.S. And U.S. and then opportunistic companies around the world that kind of meet our sort of focus.
It's very interesting. So a lot of the focus at LoWeb is to enhance the global startup community and help startups all over the world figure out like how to grow and how to build a business. How important do you think it is to find the right location for those startups, and what is that right location? Should they be coming to Silicon Valley? Should they be building up their own startup communities, or are there other amazing communities that you recommend startups be a part of?
That's a great question. I mean, one of the companies we recently funded is a company called Wrap, which is based in Stockholm, Sweden, and they're just doing amazing things, kind of building a lot of the core technology in Stockholm, and then they're starting to build some U.S. presence to build relationships and other partnerships. I think Silicon Valley is a really special place in kind of the spirit of like you're at a coffee shop or there's events almost every night you can go to and meet and network with other people and trade ideas and trade things. But I don't think it's a prerequisite or requirement for building a really big sustainable company. I think the most important thing is to be really deliberate about where you choose to build your company and what kind of people you're going to be able to recruit over time, what kind of business relationships you'll need, and where you'll need satellite offices. And as long as you feel like you have a really great core team that's really, really strong, that you'll be able to pull a lot of interesting people in no matter where you're located, I think you should be wherever you feel like it's right to build your company and build your team. And there's great companies in Hungary, things like Prezi or Ustream. Obviously, we're super excited about Wrap in Sweden, and Spotify's based in Sweden as well. There's quite a few great companies coming out of the UK or out of Germany, as well as China or India. I think one of the different interesting things is when you're in Europe, you can often start and create a great presence kind of in the European markets. There's a company called iZettle that I think has done an amazing job. It's kind of the square of Europe, so to speak. But they've done an amazing job sort of building their business from the ground up, fully based in Europe. And so I really just kind of look and say, you can build wherever you think it's right to build, and you have a really good thesis on why you believe that's the place for you.
Very cool. And so you've worked at all these amazing companies, and now you're investing in them. Have you ever built your own company?
I haven't founded a company from zero. I've kind of found in my sort of personal, just the way I work, is that I love finding these people, these brilliant founders, guys like Reed or the Beaver family who founded Zazzle, or like what Evan and Biz and Jason and Jack did with Twitter, or what Zuck did and people like Dave Morin were doing with the Facebook platform. And kind of like, I get really excited about these ideas that are kind of in this sort of crazy early stage, and really work really hard to help kind of hone those into these things that can last a long time. Getting the idea off the ground is a really, really hard process. The next really hard process is kind of planting the seeds that become the real foundation for it to be a long-term sustainable thing and sort of paving the roads. And then it becomes really hard to grow a company and actually keep operating it and driving down the roads. And those are all different stages. And so, I've been really attracted to kind of that, like, planting the seeds and establishing kind of the real fundamental foundations of a lot of these companies, even though I haven't started from the kind of that, like, day zero.
Totally. That's awesome. Just real quick, I just want to let everyone who's watching the live stream know you can post questions on our Google Plus page, and we'll make sure to ask Josh in here. Don't let him get off the hook. Ask hard questions. So it's really interesting you talk about like planting the seeds for a lot of, you've gotten to work in like some like amazingly fast-growing companies. What are some things you've learned as far as planting the right seeds, as far as culture and building the right company structure?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the first thing is, is really starting with kind of a fundamental mission that everybody understands and believes in, and is much bigger than the current product or exactly the current sort of incarnation of the business or the team. But at LinkedIn, we always believed that we were going to help professionals connect and really manage their professional careers through this new network and this new service. At Facebook, the vision was always to help people share, give people the power to share and make the world more open and connected. And really, by establishing the platform, we believe that every website and every business and every application, every service needed to be social, and that Facebook could do that. And by kind of having this big mission that the entire company is able to really latch onto, it really helps clarify a lot of sort of short-term decisions, in that you don't make short-term trade-offs in terms of like, well, we can make another dollar here or we can get another user here if it's not in service of that bigger mission. And so that really helps people say no. And so that's one fundamental thing that I think a lot of the greatest companies do that keeps everybody focused and together and working towards the same long-term mission. I think the second thing is really a culture of trust and a culture of working really, really hard. I think Evan Williams on my very first day at Twitter said, a lot of companies, when new people join, there's a lot of distrust until they prove themselves and become part of the team. At Twitter, we want to do this the opposite. We want to trust everybody who joins, that we're vetting smart, talented people to come join the team and to be part of a great culture. And that really changed the way we're solving really hard problems, thinking really long-term in the future. And when you start by just having a fundamental set of trust instead of internal distrust in politics, it can really change the way these work. And I've seen just that, really be paramount in kind of all those companies and cultures that I've worked in.
That's interesting. Do you think that there's a real big problem in terms of retention of employees or poaching? I know I've heard a lot of talk about that in San Francisco and New York mostly, but just there seems to be so much more of a demand and supply in terms of talent today, especially from the developer's perspective. Do you see that being a huge problem today, and how can companies retain their employees?
That's a great question. I think there's two parts to it. One is there are employees who kind of are great for certain stages and aren't great for others. So as companies do grow and evolve, for some people to get poached to go to another company that's at an earlier stage or at a different stage in its business kind of makes natural sense, and it's not necessarily always it's always tough to lose somebody who has a lot of good institutional knowledge, but sometimes that's just kind of the nature of growing companies and growing quickly and adding more senior employees and at different levels of scale and expertise and specialization. The second part is, though, fundamentally, if you're the best companies with the best cultures where people really work together as a team, do a lot better job retaining people. And so, making sure not to ever take it for granted that people work here because you're just going to become successful or going to become big, but want to be here because it's a chance to do the best work of their lives, and you're always thinking about how to create that environment, I think is really, really important.
Very cool. So let's talk a lot about what you're looking for now. What kind of companies really excite you? Are there specific companies that you're looking at that you're really interested in? I know that's
that's a tough. Well, look, I think there's a couple of just incredible waves and changes that are happening. And I'm focused primarily on consumer companies that are either very directly consumer products or add to the consumer ecosystem through monetization or payments or other things, because that's generally what I've worked on for my whole career. And we're at this wave where mobile is now pervasive. Like, we have computers in our pockets that we can use to communicate, use to be present all the time that we never had before. And that's just an incredible change. It used to be you were at computers for very fixed periods of the day, and you were sort of away or online, and now you're always available and always interactable. And so stuff like Twitter and SMS and everything else shows how bite-sized communication chunks can be. And the second big wave is with things like Twitter and Facebook and Pinterest as these sort of distribution platforms, content now spreads and information now spreads faster than ever before. So you can build a new consumer app and have 5-10 million people be using it within the first few months of service, which is something that was, kind of unbelievable even 5 to 7 years ago. And so with these two big changes, what we're looking for are things that are not, hey, look, short-term flashes in the pans, but that in 5 to 7 years it makes sense that there will be hundreds of millions of people connecting and adding new behaviors and interacting in new ways. One of the things that's really gotten me excited is sort of what they call this sort of ambient location space. There's companies like Highlight and Banjo, and there was Glancy and a few other ones. And what's amazing there is not that it's clear that we found the use case, and Foursquare's in that bucket, or that we found exactly the right products yet, but that as you walk around with your phone, it can actually broadcast like a little beacon to other people nearby to add context and color to the world and really help you see and connect with other people. And I just think like that's something that like we couldn't even have imagined before these new sets of services and technologies came about.
You say amazing. Some people might be a little creeped out by that.
I think people were. I think the neat thing about the future is it's always creepy at first, and then it becomes like, how could we have ever lived without it? I think examples like, in Facebook, people were like, hey, who really wants to connect with everybody and share what they're doing? Twitter used to be, and then it's all public, and people actually say what they had for breakfast. And yet, today we look at these two services as sort of like fundamental parts of our lives. If if you see something happening down the street, your first instinct now is to pull out your phone and want to send an Instagram picture or tweet it or Facebook it.
So that's a really interesting topic, and I know Facebook is almost like scientific about how they try to push the boundaries in terms of building up comfort levels around how people share information about themselves and their lives. Can you speak a little bit about how Facebook manages that kind of comfort zone and how they push the limits without pissing people off too much?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to speak as an insider or investor and just kind of give you some of my experience kind of from working there a few years ago. But I think, I think one of the things that's just been amazing for me at Facebook, and it was amazing for when I joined, is that the company really had, and especially Mark, really had an understanding of how the world could look in a few years as people worked and thought and acted differently, and just really continue to try to build products that foster the way people really want to work. If you ask somebody, do you want to do this, they may initially react and say no, or no, I'm not sure. But if you give them tools to share more, you find they really enjoy sharing. And it's not that everybody adopts every new system immediately. It does take time, and it takes patience, and it takes longevity and long-term thinking from the company and the employees and investors and everybody to realize that that's how kind of the world changes. And it's not, it's one of those overnight phenomenons that takes, 8 years, but it really is, if you keep kind of nurturing it, it really does that. And I think, people say it's with data and science and everything else. It's really with a lot of like humanity and empathy and just fundamental care for how people are using it. And I think, people say Facebook pushes the limits a lot, but I think Facebook's one of the best listening companies I've ever seen. Whenever they launch a new product, it changes quite a bit from that first product to even what the product is within a couple months based on both what people are reacting to and also how people use it.
Very cool. Yeah, it's really interesting how you can kind of see a lot of the companies that really create these movements. They've always had a strong belief about how people naturally want to interact with each other or people's true level of comfort. And they're able to like almost help people find that level of comfort that they didn't know they had originally.
Yeah, that's said better than I did.
So I think it's another really interesting space right now is online education, which is obviously something you care about because you've invested in Treehouse.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about that space? What excites you about it and what you see as the next few years in online education?
Yeah, so I think education is just a phenomenal space, and it's one of those things that's traditionally been really hard to invest in. And so, Treehouse was one of our discovery fund investments because we had we love to kind of see how companies sort of grow and prosper. But access has always been a big challenge for education. Just the ability to get access to content and learning and be able to sort of acknowledge what you've learned, what we call kind of accreditation or certification, to sort of like you get assessed on what you've learned, and you can actually get a badge or some kind of degree that shows that you've kind of mastered some skill or some learning. And in the past, access has been one of the big challenges. And the internet's now opening that up. You're seeing that with things like Khan Academy, with Treehouse, with a company called lynda.com, that with University Now, with some of the things like Coursera and Udacity, that all of a sudden you can just access learning and access information education in ways you never could before. I think we're just at the beginning of a wave of what this means for now. How do you go to school with other people? How do you share learning with other people? How do you then get tested in a way that sort of shows the skills that you've mastered so that you can have a degree and say, hey, I took these online courses, and instead of getting kind of a look sort of like, really, what does that mean? You get like, oh, great, that means you've really been tested and learned and mastered those skills, and now you're ready to do whatever it is that those say you need to. And so I just think we're at the very beginning of a sea change in education, both at the higher ed and then also at K through 12 around a lot of this mastery, and everything else. One of the companies that Greylocks is most excited about right now is called Edmodo, which is focused on connecting parents and teachers and students, online in kind of these great ways to kind of collaborate on learning and share information through a class, and everything that was that was difficult before. Because if you think about, your education community is one of the biggest communities for you, is if you're a parent growing up with children.
It's really interesting. Do you think that there's aspects to the college experience that online will just never be able to replicate?
Oh, very much. I was talking with a gentleman named Michael Staten, who's the founder of Integral, the other day, and he had this amazing insight that no matter what we do with kind of online learning, college does two things that it's almost irreplaceable. One is it pulls together a bunch of people at shared stages in their lives who get to collaborate and learn from each other and sort of grow up together and sort of just build this community that becomes pervasive through the rest of their life for people who do go to 2-year, 4-year school sort of in a full-time nature. And the second thing is it sort of gives you an excuse to live life and explore and do things that kind of in the real world you wouldn't necessarily be able to do, whether, think like fraternity parties or other crazy things that everyone knows they did in college. That like, you kind of like, oh, I'm in college so I can do that when you're in the working world it doesn't. And so those are parts of life that may be very difficult to replicate, but some of the learning and educational parts, may come more online and be able to be part of much more of lifelong learning as well, and not just something you go do for one stage of your life and then stop.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I see a lot more like education is becoming democratized. People can study exactly what they want to study and spend their time learning the specific things that they want to learn rather than kind of being forced into some sort of curriculum that maybe doesn't really appeal to them.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Cool. So we only have a few minutes left here, so a couple more questions. I'm going to ask a fun one. What was your favorite company to work at?
I tell you, I've been lucky to have a lot of great experiences. But I'd say that probably Twitter most recently was just one of the most incredible movements and changes. When I joined the company, we were at this incredible stage where the world kind of knew that Twitter existed, and everybody was like, oh, I know what Twitter is. And then it was like, do you use it? And they all said no. So I think just to be kind of at this like worldwide phenomenon before it was like really the same kind of fundamental core tool that made a lot of people's lives different was just this crazy challenge. And the team there at the time that I was there, it was just an amazing experience to work together to really solve that. And by the time I left Twitter, like I was really proud to say we had over 100 million active users, people who were using it, every day to change their lives. We'd seen these movements like Arab Spring that had really used Twitter to kind of power and coordinate these just massive changes in the world that's really kind of unfathomable. And so, you always want to, and you always want to think your latest is the greatest because that just drives you to keep going forward.
For sure. I mean, the growth of Twitter was always interesting. It was almost like, it always seemed like forcing the square peg into a circle.
Yeah.
But like, it continued to grow, it continued to become established. But it certainly wasn't an easy road, and it wasn't an easy path, and there were a lot of bumps in that road. What were some major, or at least one major mistake that you guys made that you can share with other entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think it's kind of hard to catch on, but I think there was a lot of interesting challenges at Twitter around the way that we first opened up the platform, what that ended up meaning for the long-term Twitter. I think when Facebook first opened its platform, it really kind of tried to understand what the value exchange was between, hey, if we'll open these things up to developers and they'll build tools that will add a lot of specific value onto Facebook, and you've seen Facebook kind of evolve its platform quite a bit. At Twitter, I think it was a little bit more of like, hey, let's open it up and we'll be amazed by what people can do with the data and build on top of the product. And I think what happened were two amazing things. One is there was just a lot of amazing innovation that's happened around Twitter, ways to mine Twitter data and search Twitter for interesting content and do analytics and get sense of what the public was talking about. I think there was another challenge that wasn't as well maintained, which is exactly what's the relationship between Twitter and the developers. And so, one of the great things that happened where there was this amazing proliferation of Twitter clients that gave a ton of different Twitter experiences for the world. But I think it also opened up a problem where Twitter actually wasn't in control of its experience for the way a lot of users were interacting with it and sort of didn't have the right relationship set up to really handle that. And so I think as you saw Twitter kind of go through that learning and figure out how to make that work best for the platform and the community, I think it was a real challenge. I think there was a painful moment in the company's history when we really had to revisit some of those early assumptions. And I wish, I wouldn't really call it a mistake as much as a wish that kind of, if you could have predicted everything that would happen, you would do an even better job the next time. And so I think like opening a platform is one of those things that like a lot of people think it's easy and you can just do it early, and if you build it, they will come. And I think platforms are one of the hardest things to get right to really become a sustaining long-term value. I think companies like Apple and Microsoft and Facebook and have shown that when you have a deep fundamental platform, the kind of value you can create as a company is monumental and kind of breathtaking. And yet I think you really want to understand that value from day one and sort of what you hope to get out of it, and wait until you really have the right proof of concept before you do it. And I'm not saying Twitter did it too early. I think Twitter actually has ended up getting it right, and it really has a fundamental platform in the future. But I think there was a lot more bumps in that road and a lot of good learning along the way.
For sure. What was I going to ask? I forgot now. So Twitter started out very, very, very simple, and it always kind of kept that mentality of keeping things as simple as possible and building a really open platform that people can build upon however they wanted to, and users pretty much defined it with @replies, retweets. A lot of the features came from how people used it. Would you recommend that other startups take the same model of keeping things as simple as possible and really open and letting users define it, as opposed to other things that you see launch like Quora or other platforms that are so heavy and feature built and really well thought out, but like they're very heavy up front and there isn't a lot of room for users to define it themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I would call Quora pretty simple. Look, I think all great products have a fundamental, simple thesis at their core, and you really want to just hone that and get that right. Twitter, it was the simplicity of 140 characters in a tweet. Quora, I would argue it's as simple as ask a question and see answers, and they just do an amazing job there. And so, Facebook was the very simple profile, and that you could sort of, push updates and people would see their updates. Foursquare had the simple check-in. And I would say you really want to evolve it towards that big mission we talked about at the very beginning, where you really understand where your company is going for the long term, but how to use the simplest building blocks to try to get there. And you always want to be listening to your community and watching how they're using your platform and your technology and your products in ways so you can kind of foster the best kind of activities and behavior and engagement that gets you towards that long-term goal.
That's great advice. Well, my closing remark was going to let you have a closing remark. You already gave a lot of amazing advice, but what's one piece of amazing advice, say someone who's trying to raise money from you guys, like what is the one thing that you would advise startups to do? Yeah,
so that's a great question, and something that I'll turn it into what we look forward to talking more about at LeWeb, is that a lot of people talk about this great product that they're going to make, and that they know that if they make it, that everybody's going to want to use it, and that's partially true, and that's really important, and you have to have a great, meaningful product. But a lot of people don't talk about in the same fervor and the same depth is how their product's going to grow and get in users' hands and why it's going to evolve. I don't really believe in the if you build it, they will come, because there's so many things happening right now, and there's so many ways that people are learning about new things and trying them out and disposing them and everything else, that you really want to have just as good a thesis on why your product's important and why it's going to be meaningful in the world, for how it's going to distribute and get in the hands of users and be part of this great big network of the world. And I think when you understand both of those things, you have an amazing shot to build a long-lasting company. And kind of at Greylock, a lot of what we look for are great entrepreneurs who are building these fundamental building block companies that will be these iconic companies, with new behaviors in the future, that really understand the importance and how to nurture growth in a community along the way.
Very good advice. I could keep asking you questions all day. We got to leave something for Le Web, though. So we're going to close it off here. Le Web is June 19th and 20th in London. You get to see amazing speakers like Josh and lots of other amazing speakers. If you're watching it live, there's actually only 24 hours left before you can get the early bird price, so get in there. We're also giving away tickets on Google Plus today and all over for the next few weeks, so stay tuned. Yep, Josh, thank you so much for your time. It was really great chatting with you.
Great. Thanks, David. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you in London.